There is a moment, it comes for almost everyone, usually somewhere past 60. You are standing in your kitchen or sitting in your car in a parking lot you have parked in 1,000 times before, and the noise of the day just stops. And one question rises up from underneath everything else. Is this it? Is this what the rest of my life is going to feel like? The body has changed. The mirror shows someone your parents used to be. The kids have their own kids now. The job that once told you who you were is gone, or fading, or something you count down toward on a calendar. And in that silence, a second question follows the first one. Not what is next, but what was the point? Here is what almost nobody tells you. That question is not a curse. It is a door. 2,000 years ago, a small group of thinkers in Rome answered this exact question. Not in temples, in letters to dying friends, in private notebooks never meant to be read, in speeches given by men who had lost everything and found something sturdier underneath the wreckage. They called it Stoicism, and it was built, almost word for word, for the exact chapter of life you are standing in right now. Not for the young and hungry, for the ones who have already lived enough to know that comfort was never the answer, and are finally ready to hear what is. By the end of this video, you will understand why so many people spend their 60s, 70s, and 80s either quietly afraid or quietly angry. And you will understand the one shift in thinking that turns those same years into the calmest, freest years a person can live. Stay until the fourth section, because it holds one idea, taken almost word for word from a private notebook a Roman emperor never meant for anyone else to see, and it has changed how thousands of people in this community think about the time they have left. It might be the most important few minutes you spend all week. Welcome to Stoic Discipline, the home for anyone who has ever wanted to feel steady in a world that will not slow down for you. Here we take the oldest, most tested ideas about how to live, and we hand them to you as tools, not lectures. Marcus Aurelius, the man who ruled the known world and still found time each night to ask himself if he had lived well that day, is our guide through most of what follows. Epictetus, a man who began life enslaved and ended it teaching emperors what freedom actually meant, and Seneca, a statesman who lost his fortune and still taught calm to others, will walk beside him. If you are new here, this is your invitation to sit down, breathe, and remember something simple. Peace of mind was never something you had to chase. It was something you had to uncover. Let's begin. Somewhere along the way, most of us picked up a story about growing old that we never actually chose for ourselves. It came from ads that only show wrinkles being erased. It came from workplaces that quietly stop inviting you to certain meetings once you pass a certain age. It came from a culture that treats 60, 70, and 80 as a slow walk toward the exit instead of an arrival into something new. And because nobody ever questioned that story out loud, most people walk into their later years already grieving a version of themselves that a much younger world told them was the only version worth being. Think of someone you know, a parent, a neighbor, maybe yourself. Someone who turned 65 and suddenly seemed to shrink, not in the body, something quieter than that. They stopped starting new things. They talked more about the past than the future. They apologized for taking up space at their own dinner table, as if their opinions had expired along with their old job title. Nobody did this to them directly. They did it to themselves, because they had quietly accepted a script that said, this next part is decline, not growth. Marcus Aurelius would have found this almost embarrassing for us, not because aging is not real. He knew the body fails. He buried children. He watched friends die of plague while he still had an empire to run. But he built his entire private discipline around one idea that still sounds radical today. A person's worth has nothing to do with what the body can still do, and everything to do with what the mind chooses to do with what remains. Epictetus taught something that fits perfectly next to this. He said the body is not fully yours in the way you assume. It is on loan. It was always going to change, and one day it will be returned. What is actually yours, what cannot be taken by age, or illness, or circumstance, is your judgment. Your ability to choose how you respond, and that ability does not weaken with age. If anything, it sharpens, the same way a blade gets thinner and sharper with every pass across the stone. So here is the first shift, right at the start, before anything else in this video can make sense. Growing older is not subtraction, it is a transfer of power. The power you use to put into your appearance, your job title, your speed, your ability to keep up with a room full of younger people. That power does not vanish. It gets returned to you, and it becomes available for something the Stoics considered far more valuable. Your character, your judgment, your ability to stay steady while everyone else panics. That is not a smaller life. According to men who studied a good life more carefully than almost anyone in history, that is the beginning of the only life worth having. If that idea already loosens something in your chest, drop a comment below with the one word, rise, and tell me your age, and the year you secretly hope people remember as when things finally turned for you. I read every one of these, and I promise you this community is full of people exactly like you, quietly rebuilding what a good life looks like from the inside out. Now let's talk about time, because nothing haunts a person in their 60s quite like the sound of a clock they suddenly hear too clearly. Seneca wrote an entire letter about this, and the very first line still lands like a slap 2,000 years later. He said most people complain that life is too short, but the truth, he argued, is not that we are given too little time, it is that we waste so much of the time we are given. Life is long enough, he said, if you know how to spend it. Sit with that for a second, because it flips the whole fear so many people carry into their 60s and 70s, the fear that there simply is not enough time left to matter. Seneca is not offering you comfort here. He is handing you something sharper than comfort. The anxious version of a life, the one spent scrolling, comparing, resenting, can waste entire decades without the person even noticing, while a present, attentive version of that same life can find more meaning in one remaining year than most people find in 80 years of sleepwalking. Picture two people, both turning 65 on the same day. The first spends their mornings replaying old arguments, resenting family for things that cannot be undone, dreading a future they have already decided will be lonely. The second, with the exact same body, the exact same bank account, the exact same number of years left, spends their mornings present with whoever is in front of them, curious about one small new thing each week, and treats an ordinary Tuesday like something that will never happen in quite the same way again. Which one of these two actually lived longer? Seneca would say the second one, not as a nice metaphor, literally, because a life measured by attention holds more actual living inside it than a life measured only by the number of mornings you happen to wake up. I want you to try something with me right now. Think of one thing you have been quietly postponing under the story of someday, a conversation you have meant to have, a trip you keep pushing back, a hobby from your 20s you gave up on without ever really deciding to. Write it in the comments, not to perform it for strangers, but because naming a thing out loud is the first step toward actually choosing it, instead of just wishing for it in silence. Now I want to tell you a story, because ideas travel further when they have a face attached to them. This one belongs to Marcus Aurelius himself, in a year that history rarely talks about. A plague was tearing through the empire he ruled. It had already taken soldiers, senators, and members of his own household. He had buried more than one of his own children by this point in his life. He was not young. He did not have unlimited strength left. He had every reason, every excuse to retreat into grief and let the empire run itself for a while. Instead, most nights, after a day that would have broken most men in half, he sat down with a private notebook, not to write a speech, not for anyone else to ever read. He wrote to himself, short lines, reminders, arguments with his own fear. He told himself, again and again, that the obstacle in front of him was not blocking his path. It was becoming the path, if he let it. This was not a man who had already mastered peace and was simply recording his wisdom for later fans to admire. This was a man practicing, entry after entry, the discipline of turning "this happened to me" into "this is what I now have to work with." I am not telling you this story to suggest you need a tragedy of that size to prove anything. Almost none of us will ever rule an empire through a plague. I am telling you this because of what it reveals. The years many people treat as the fading part of a life are, according to the man who may have practiced Stoicism more honestly than anyone in history, actually the proving ground. Everything you spent your earlier decades practicing was preparation for exactly this chapter. Not a smaller version of yourself, the tested version. If any part of this video is landing for you right now, hit the like button, not for me. It tells the platform to place this in front of one more person out there, quietly afraid of turning 65, who needs to hear exactly this today. Let's get practical, because you deserve more from this video than stories. Epictetus built his entire teaching around one distinction so simple it sounds almost too obvious, and yet almost nobody actually lives by it. Some things are up to us, our judgments, our choices, our reactions. And some things are not up to us, our bodies, our reputations, what other people think of us. Nearly all suffering, he argued, comes from confusing these two lists. Apply this directly to your 60s, your 70s, your 80s, because this is exactly where it stops being philosophy and starts being survival. Your knees are not fully up to you anymore, not the way they were at 35. Your hearing, your eyesight, how fast you bounce back after a long day, these shift according to biology, not according to your effort or your character. If your happiness depends on your body behaving the way it did decades ago, you have guaranteed yourself years of quiet grief, because you are demanding control over something that was never fully yours to control at any age. But here is the flip side. People rush past because they are too busy mourning the first half. What remains completely, entirely yours at 60, at 75, at 90, is how you interpret what is happening. Whether you meet a hard diagnosis with dignity or despair, whether a slower morning brings gratitude for the morning you still have, or resentment for the morning you used to have. A woman in this community once told me about a hip injury that ended the mountain hikes she had built her whole identity around. She grieved that, honestly, and Stoicism never asks anyone to skip real grief. But months later she realized the actual source of her joy had never been the mountain, it had been attention. Light through leaves, her own breath, the quiet company of her thoughts. All of that turned out to be fully available on a flat path 15 minutes from her front door. Tonight, take a piece of paper and draw one line down the middle. On one side, write down what genuinely frightens you about growing older. On the other side, next to each fear, write the one thing that stays completely up to you in how you respond to it. Not a fix, just your judgment. Practiced for 2,000 years, this single exercise is one of the fastest ways to feel your footing return underneath you. There is a phrase later thinkers borrowed from Stoic soil, amor fati, the love of one's fate, not gritted acceptance, an active, chosen embrace of the life that actually happened, instead of a quiet, permanent mourning for the life you imagined instead. By this point in a life, almost everyone carries a ghost version of themselves. The career that did not go the way you planned, the marriage that ended, or the one that never started, the health that did not hold up the way you promised yourself it would. That ghost quietly haunts every ordinary Tuesday of the actual life still available to be lived. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself about this constantly, which tells you something useful. Even an emperor with access to every philosopher in the ancient world did not master this once and move on. He practiced it daily, like a muscle, because it required daily maintenance. That is good news for you. You are not failing by needing to return to this idea again and again. You are doing exactly what he had to do too. Underneath so many conversations about growing older sits a quiet fear of being alone. Friends pass, spouses pass, children build lives in other cities. That grief is real, and no Stoic ever asked anyone to pretend otherwise. But there is a distinction our modern world has almost completely lost: the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the feeling that something essential is missing, that the world has moved on without you. Solitude is simply being alone, and it can be agonizing or restorative, depending entirely on the relationship you have built with your own mind. Epictetus taught his students that a person who cannot bear their own company has revealed something important. Not that solitude is dangerous, that they have not yet done the work of becoming someone worth spending time with. This is why so many people in their 60s and 70s, with the quietest homes, are sometimes the most content people you will ever meet, while others, surrounded by constant noise, remain restless. The difference rarely comes down to how many people are in the room. It comes down to whether a lifetime of avoiding your own thoughts has left you with an inner world that feels safe to sit inside, or one that feels unbearable the moment the noise stops. If solitude currently feels closer to loneliness than peace, start small. 10 minutes a day, no phone, no task, just sitting with whatever thoughts arrive, without needing to fix or escape them. It will feel uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is not a sign you are doing it wrong. It is a sign of exactly how unpracticed the skill has become. If you want to build this discipline properly, alongside people practicing it right now, subscribe to this channel, because we go deeper into exactly this every single week. We need to talk about the thing almost every culture teaches us to avoid, especially once it stops feeling abstract: death. The Stoics practice something called memento mori. Remember that you will die, not as a morbid habit, but as one of the most useful tools available for actually living. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly, in that same private notebook, that he could leave this life at any moment, and he let that fact shape how he treated the people standing in front of him. Seneca told his friend Lucilius to count each day as a small, complete life of its own, not to fear death more, but because an honest relationship with mortality strips away the small, petty distractions that otherwise eat an entire human life without asking permission. Here is why this matters more for you right now than it did at 25. At 25, death is theoretical. By 60 or 70, it has stopped being theoretical. You have already lost people. Your own body has already reminded you of your timeline more than once. This puts you in a position younger people rarely reach. You can no longer avoid this truth through denial. The only real question left is whether you face it with terror or with the strange, hard-won clarity the Stoics insisted was waiting on the other side of it. Once a week, take 5 quiet minutes and honestly consider that this could be your final year. Not to spiral, to ask one clarifying question. If this were true, what would I stop tolerating? Who would I finally call? What tiny daily irritation would suddenly reveal itself as embarrassingly unimportant? Let's close with structure, because ideas without habits stay ideas. First, the morning premeditation. Before your day begins, spend a few minutes honestly picturing what might go wrong, not to spiral, to rehearse. Meeting these possibilities calmly in your imagination first robs them of their power to ambush you later. Second, the evening review, the same practice that likely filled most of that private notebook. Each night, ask 3 honest questions. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short of who I want to be? What will I do differently tomorrow? Gentle, like an athlete reviewing footage, never a judge issuing a sentence. Third, deliberate discomfort. The Stoics occasionally chose simpler meals, colder rooms, plainer clothes, not out of self-punishment, but to prove to themselves that their peace did not depend on comfort. For you, this might mean choosing the harder, more honest conversation instead of the easy, avoidant one. Fourth and last, active virtue. Each day, look for one small chance to practice courage, fairness, wisdom, or self-control. Courage might mean finally telling your adult child how you actually feel. Wisdom might mean pausing before reacting to something that once would have made you furious. According to the Stoics, these small daily choices are not a warm-up for the real thing. They are the entire substance of a well-lived life. Let's bring this all the way back to where we started. That quiet moment past 60, when the world goes silent and a question rises up uninvited. Is this it? I hope, if you stayed with me this far, that question no longer feels like a threat. I hope it feels closer to an invitation, the way it was always meant to. You are not approaching a decline, you are approaching the exact chapter this entire philosophy was built for. The chapter where the noise of ambition finally has room to quiet down, where your judgment has had decades to sharpen, where you have more real freedom, not less, to decide who you are going to be with the time that remains. Your body will keep changing. That was never fully up to you, at any age. But your character, your attention, your ability to love the life you actually have, instead of grieving the one you imagined, that stays entirely, completely yours for as long as you are here to use it. If this video gave you even a small piece of that steadiness, I want to ask you for 3 things, and none of them will take more than a moment. First, subscribe to Stoic Discipline, because we build a video exactly like this one every single week for people done chasing noise and ready to build something calmer. Second, comment the one-word discipline and tell me which single idea from this video you are actually going to practice this week. Naming it here, publicly, makes it far more likely you will follow through. Third, if you know someone in their 60s or beyond who has seemed a little quieter lately, a little more uncertain about what comes next, send them this video. You might be handing them exactly the reframe they have been waiting for, without ever knowing how to ask for it. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Of everything you could have done with this half hour, you chose to sit with these ideas. That alone tells me something good about the years you still have ahead of you. Until the next video, take care of your judgment. The rest will follow. This has been Stoic Discipline,